Good afternoon. On today's Angry Bulletin, the Pentagon has issued a statement about the mysterious and infamous Jellyfish UFO that's been making the rounds on the internet, although their statement has not cleared up the mystery at all. So what is this thing? Is it poor CGI? Is it some sort of smudge on the lens? Or is it something flying over a U.S. military base in Iraq? Well, a lot of people have weighed in on this footage, from the man who went public with it in the first place to people with Google Earth and a calculator analyzing the image and coming to their own rational conclusions. And when it comes right down to it, all of these people have their own agendas. So if we study this footage with an open mind, can we come to any sorts of conclusions about it? Well, I believe we can, and we're going to do that right now. Good afternoon, and once again, welcome to the Angry Astronaut. So, back to the world of UFOs, UAPs, whatever you want to call them, and the latest story that has been making the rounds in the news wires and the internet, etc., the so-called Jellyfish UFO, Spaghetti Monster UFO, whatever you want to call it. Once again, very interesting stuff that's starting to hit the web these days, and most of it coming from military surveillance equipment, and not just from the United States, but some South American and Central American countries as well. Quite an interesting collection of images that are being compiled by the various militaries of these nations, again, trying to get down to the bottom of the whole UAP mystery. However, this particular piece of footage was not released by the military, but rather leaked. And it was released by somebody who has an extremely controversial reputation in the public eye, and that is Jeremy Corbell. Now, for those of you who don't know a great deal about the guy, well, he's sort of unique. He definitely has an agenda, and one of his more recent stories has turned out to be pretty questionable, and it's actually something that I personally reported on a couple of months ago. I'd like to clarify exactly what the facts are in that particular case that he has conveniently moved on from. I guess you're starting to probably pick up on my general opinions of this fellow. I don't find his journalism to be particularly credible. However, that being the case, I do believe that this is legitimate U.S. military surveillance footage, and a lot has been made from other self-proclaimed experts on the internet as to what they think this object might be, and a lot of the people who tend to lean towards the more mundane explanations have said that this is just a bunch of balloons floating over a military base. And others have said that this was faked, that this was poor CGI or whatever. However, that is definitely not the case, and I have discarded those particular criticisms and instead focused on the people who have done analyses of what was filmed and where it happened, the time of day it happened, what the conditions might have been, etc., in order to get an idea of what this object might have been. But here's what I've discovered. Even though I may not have a very favorable opinion of Mr. Corbell, and shortly you're going to see why, I don't have a favorable opinion of these other folks either, because they too have an agenda. They already have a preconceived notion of what they're looking at before they come to any sorts of conclusions. They tend to feel that UFO believers, whatever you want to call them, are nut jobs or deluded, misled, whatever, and they want to strike a blow for science, strike a blow for rational thought. But are they really doing this, or are they too seeing precisely what they want to see? So, okay, remember when I said the Pentagon had made a statement about what this thing is? Well, here's the statement. No comment. Boy, that's real helpful, isn't it? Well, here's the thing though. If it was some sort of mundane object, wouldn't they say something about that? No comment just makes the whole thing a lot more mysterious in my opinion. And this is something that Jeremy Corbell thinks as well. When he's not flexing on us, that is.
Everybody is catching up with my and George Knapp's reporting, as has been the trend. The DoD is catching up. Even News Nation and yourself, who have been fastidious with looking into the UFO issue, everybody is catching up. So let me help you tonight.
You think that might have been a little patronizing, Jeremy? And while we're catching up, perhaps you can explain to me about this particular case that I also reported on, where a series of lights were spotted over U.S. military base, and you actually got testimony from somebody who was on the base at the time who supposedly witnessed this V-shaped craft soaring over the base, similar to the Phoenix Lights incident. However, John Greenwald at the Black Vault also looked into this with his own Freedom of Information Act request and got this photo, which was taken at the same time on the same base, and it clearly shows 5 smoke trails. By interesting coincidence, the same number of smoke trails as there were lights in the original photograph, and these are clearly smoke trails from U.S. military flares. It seems that the Marines may have put on some kind of hoax for fun or something like that, and perhaps the testimony that you got was part of this hoax. However, if that is indeed the case, it means that the U.S. military or U.S. military personnel used military flares and military equipment in order to cook this whole thing up, which doesn't seem like a very good thing to do, and I'm in the process of investigating this particular incident to see whether or not this base or the Marine Corps in general has a statement to make about what happened here. So when you're talking about news agencies catching up, it could be that they just don't want to jump the gun and make fools out of themselves. Oh, and by the way, dude, you got sick style, but it's not exactly the kind of style that conveys a whole lot of credibility. You might want to try a suede sport coat and some sunglasses. Okay, maybe you shouldn't try that. Let's get back to the Jellyfish UFO. Now, based on the testimony of a soldier who came forward to News Nation with details on what was seen and the whole mystery surrounding this strange object, which was apparently the base's ghost story at the time, an investigator named Mick West decided to put a lot of work on Google Earth into recreating the incident, trying to locate the exact spot where the surveillance balloon that filmed the footage might have been, and therefore crunch some numbers to determine what the size of this object was, what its altitude was, and what it might have been. And of course, he came to some immediate conclusions, and I'm not going to leave you in suspense. He thinks that it was a bunch of balloons, and here are his justifications. First of all, he points out that some observers thought that the thermal signature of the object was changing, and given that this was filmed with a thermal camera, that makes a great deal of sense, but have a look. The image actually gets darker when it passes over something behind it, terrain behind it that is darker as well, indicating that it's just an adjustment being made by the camera and not an actual change in the thermal signature. However, I think that this is an oversimplification. You may have seen it just there. Let's have a closer look at that image. The object is clearly passing in front of something very dark. It looks like a fence or something like that, which reads out very different on this thermal camera, possibly because it's made out of metal or something like that. So if the thermal image does indeed change with the background, then why does this happen? And by the way, this is not the only example during the footage where you have a very clear change in terrain behind the object, and yet the thermal signature doesn't change at all, as you can clearly see right there. So there doesn't seem to be a direct correspondence between terrain and the variation in the thermal appearance of the object. I think we're making a little too much out of a couple of pieces of the footage. But here's the most important thing that Mr. West points to when he's making his analysis of what he thinks this object actually is. He locates a flag in the background, isolates it, and shows which direction the flag seems to be flying. And it appears to be flying to the left, corresponding to the direction that the object is traveling in. However, I'm not entirely certain about this. This flag may be flying in a direction that exactly corresponds to the path of the object, or it may be a little different. If we want to call the due left direction, that is, due west, it almost seems that the flag is flying a bit more to the southwest, not exactly corresponding to the path of the UFO. And on top of that, if we're talking about thermals, wind direction, that sort of thing, it can vary and change wildly depending on altitude. By Mr. West's own admission, this object is flying at several hundred meters up, and to say that its trajectory has to correspond to the trajectory that a flag seems to be demonstrating at ground level is not very thorough analysis. As a matter of fact, it's not very thorough analysis at all to study things based on Google Earth, by the images that have been provided to us by somebody who has no connection to the US military, and making some wild calculations about where you think the balloon was located, what kind of camera you think it was using, what sort of resolution it was presenting. Really, all kinds of unknown factors involved in this footage, which makes analysis a very difficult thing to do if you don't have all the facts. And yet, that is precisely what Mr. West and other people are trying to do, and also Mr. Corbell for that matter, coming to conclusions without all the facts. But here's the richest part of all when it comes to Mr. West's final analysis.
It might be a new form of life, an ultra-terrestrial non-human intelligence jellyfish-like creature, or even an interdimensional probe. But those things are pretty extraordinary, and we don't even know if they exist. We do know that ordinary balloons are a very common source of airborne clutter. These objects move like balloons, and they're balloon-sized. So despite the odd appearance, I think that what we are looking at here is something like two bunches of balloons, miles apart, drifting in the wind.
Okay, Mr. West, that was pretty patronizing as well, although nothing adds to your credibility like a good old-fashioned English accent. But here's the problem with this analysis as far as I'm concerned. What do you mean these things move like balloons and they're balloon-sized? Balloons can come in all kinds of different sizes, and when it comes down to it, I think that there's many things about this object that really don't look like a collection of balloons. For example, the tendrils hanging down from it. That is very strange indeed. If this is moving in a pretty solid wind, and once again, I refer you to the flag image that you pointed out, that flag is moving pretty energetically in this wind. So why are these tendrils not moving? They must be pretty solid to remain that immobile while this thing is flying around in the wind. Let's compare it to something that also looks like a jellyfish, this jellyfish kite. Those tendrils are really in motion. And that's something that I would expect to see with a collection of balloons with some sort of decorative streamers attached. However, this object is completely immobile. And by the way, there's some other images from around the planet. Once again, for all I know, these could be faked, which are also showing a similar jellyfish-like object that doesn't move. Whatever the thing is, it remains immobile as it flies around. Now, for what it's worth, since this object clearly casts a shadow, I think it's something that's actually there, but it might be some sort of unique and unusual looking drone for all we know. And once again, this isn't coming from a US military camera, so that has to be taken very much with a grain of salt. However, this collection of images, this particular footage, should be taken very seriously. I think it isn't gross oversimplification to just dismiss this as a bunch of balloons solely based on calculations made with Google Earth and estimated wind speed and direction based on the fluttering of a very blurry and fuzzy flag at ground level. Oh yeah, and before I forget, there was a second piece of footage supposedly taken later on that showed the same object flying over a lake or something, and it subsequently plunged into the lake. Now, I agree with the skeptics in the fact that we really can't determine what this object is, or if it is indeed the same object, or if the footage was taken at the same time. But the fact remains, an unidentified object passed over U.S. military base in the dead of night, was observed by a thermal camera designed to detect any sorts of intrusions. That object does not, in my opinion, seem to correspond to a bunch of balloons flying with the wind. I really think it's more complicated than that, and the public deserves a better reply from our military than no comment. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, please subscribe. It really helps my channel, and I'd also like to thank the 12 people who have chosen to support my channel on Patreon in the last 30 days. Thank you so much. It makes a massive difference, and if you would like to join my growing Discord community, well, all the details on how to do that are in the description. And if you haven't watched my alien super weapons video, well, that's a big help to me as well, because I have a sponsor for that particular video, and all you have to do is watch it, and that helps my channel too. Again, thank you so much for watching, and until we get some solid answers from our government on things like this, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.